What is up, Journey Church? I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome to the Extra Mile, where we are going the extra mile when dealing with the seriousness of the topic of mental health. So if you were there this morning or you're just tuning in now, I encourage you to go back and watch the service from today. That way you have a better understanding of where we're at. I am here with the clinical director of Your Story Counseling, Miss Brooke Williams. And my name is Sean. I'm the campus pastor. So I've really been looking forward to this conversation with Miss Brooke because she's not only a friend, but she's also my counselor that I've been to. And so trust me when I say you can trust her and what she has and the information that she brings. But welcome, Miss Brooke. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Sean. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Absolutely. Well, let's start off with talking a little bit about you, Brooke, as the clinical director of Your Story. What does that mean? What is it that you do?
Yeah, so as a clinical director, first of all, I'm a licensed professional counselor and a licensed professional counselor supervisor. So my job essentially is to clinically advise our counselors that we have on staff. So they are all licensed or in process of licensing or graduate students, and we're just always talking through the different ways that they're serving the clients within the counseling center. Awesome.
Now, when did you get into this field?
So I've been in the mental health field for a little over 10 years now. It is my second career. So my undergrad is in computer information systems. So I was in the IT world for a minute. And then God called me into this after some mental health struggles that we went through when I kind of was brought into this world through some struggles that my son was having.
Gotcha. It seems like counselors that I talk to, they all have some personal element towards this that led them down this path, and then they start diving in head first, and it just becomes their career to help people.
Yeah, it's hard not to, once your eyes are kind of open to the different kind of pains and wounds in the world, to step back away from that, because it really does start to color the way that you see people and the way that you interact with them.
Yeah, you're given this responsibility, this power, and quote Spider-Man, with great power comes responsibility. You almost can't pull back after that.
Right.
That's awesome. Well, we appreciate you being here. So today at church, we talked about depression and anxiety for the first week of installments, and we'll cover other topics in the weeks to come. But depression and anxiety, that's a pretty strong topic to kick a sermon series off with.
It's a heavy one.
It's very heavy. We saw the effects of it for sure, and the people who responded with the cards. I mean, there were cards stacked on cards on the cross, which was very cool to see. But in the service, you saw people crying. Yeah. You saw people really responding. So I know that today was a heavy topic, and I know that it began people's steps. But for the folks who are joining us online, they probably have questions of their own, and they're going to get a chance to ask some of those questions when we do our night of worship gathering at the end of our sermon series here. But I do want to talk a little bit more in depth about depression and anxiety and how it works out with people. And I think when I think about the sermon that Pastor Chris gave, one of the things that he said is that our depression and anxiety is not always driven by our circumstances. And I do think that we do fall into the gap of thinking wrongly that circumstances do play so much of a role in that. So what are some other common misconceptions about depression and anxiety?
Oh gosh. There's so many. I think that one in itself is one of the bigger ones that we hear in the counseling center, because it's what keeps people from getting the help that they need, because they feel like just so much shame. How can I have so much and still feel so terrible? And you know, our culture tells us a lot of things. It tells us how to kind of walk through a lot of things, and it's not always helpful. So culturally, we hear a lot about just being grateful and being thankful, and you know, even within the church, that's, you know, like we want to give praise all the time, and even when things are hard, and all of that's true, right? We can praise God no matter our circumstances, but a lot of times we're taught to kind of hide the things that are hard because we should be praising. So like there's a lot of shoulds in that message. I should feel better. I should just be thankful for what I have. And we get stuck in those messages a lot of times. And so that can really beat down somebody that is struggling with the shame of depression or anxiety.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think definitely could be the common misconception there is with the circumstances.
Yeah.
But we do know that circumstances they can play a role.
They can.
They can.
I think about people that are struggling with loss. So James told his story about his mother, and thinking about people that are working through something really difficult, like a job loss or something like that, and that can kick off a depression. Or it could just be a really tough season of sadness and grief when I'm thinking that my life is going to go a certain way and then it doesn't quite look the way that I intended it to. So there are some circumstances that depression makes sense, but also there are times that we don't necessarily need to label it that. We can just be okay being really sad. But I think the misconception or the thing that we can do better as a society in general is just to be more aware of how we're feeling about things. So be more open to talk and share about the things that we're feeling in general, whether it has a label or not.
Yeah.
And so if I can sit with you and say, I'm feeling really sad, I don't know if it's depression or not, but I know that this is what I'm carrying, what I'm holding on to, then that opens a door for me to be seen in whatever that is. And that can be the highs and the lows, right? Like we can praise dance all through here, and we can, we can cry together, we can do all of those things, but there's so many different ways that we put judgment on our emotions that doesn't help when we're really talking about healing from the things that we're walking through.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so someone is wrestling with this idea. They don't know what they're feeling. So you got people at home right now who are listening. You got people who are at church today, and they've always had this stigma of what depression and anxiety is. How did they come to the conclusion like I need some help?
Yeah.
Like I think I might be depressed. I think I might be wrestling anxiety wise. I mean, I know for me, anxiety is something that I've experienced this year, and it's taken some weird effects on my body. Like you and I've had conversations about why I feel like my heart is going to blow up on me. And it's this feeling of I feel like something's off on the inside, and then to point at me and say, no, it's anxiety. I go, I don't know. I think I'm broken. And so I go to the doctor, and the doctor's like, no, you're fine. You're anxious about something. But you have people who are at home right now who are trying to figure out where's that line, where's that balance. Where do people find out I need to go get help? I might be depressed or anxiety.
Yeah. So clinically, what we would talk about is when your depression or anxiety is getting to a place where it's affecting your everyday life. So that puts it in the range of clinical, right? Okay. But even before we get to that point, I think that there is an argument to be made that we should be taking care of our mental health and wellness all the time, kind of in the same ways that we take care of our physical health, right? So, we exercise and we have a nutritious diet most of the time and those kinds of things, right? So we're comfortable saying this is how we take care of our body, but we're not as comfortable saying this is how I take care of my emotions. And so if we can incorporate some things along the way, some daily tasks or some things that really keep us noticing the things that we're feeling, then we're more apt to know where we stand along the way. Gotcha.
What are some suggestions that you would have? I know Pastor Chris mentioned journaling at some point, just kind of tracking, this is how I felt today. I may not feel the same way tomorrow, but you can go back and look at it. What are some other, is there any other ways that you can help track that? Or
Yeah. So I always, with my clients, if anybody has worked with me before, a lot of times I'm suggesting emotional check-ins for people that that haven't really done that kind of work before. Because again, we're taught like just roll through it, right? Like just roll through your day,
Grind
get
it
it
out.
done, do what you got to do. And so along the way, we put in however many hours at work, and then we come home and we're taking care of the family, and we don't have time to sit and think about what am I feeling, right? This can feel so foreign to people that have never had these kinds of conversations. But if you just take 2 minutes every couple of hours and just check in with your body, right? How am I feeling? Where am I feeling this? I know I was telling you earlier, I threw out my shoulder this week, right? So ever since I started doing private practice work with clients, I know that I hold emotion in my shoulders. They just get tighter and tighter and tighter if I'm not dealing with it. And the effects of that is that sometimes I throw out my shoulder. I had never done that until I started doing this work. But that's something that I've learned along the way. And so making sure that I'm taking care of my emotional health also means dealing with the emotions that I'm carrying for other people.
Yeah.
And so knowing that about my body, when I start to feel tight in that area, for some people it's, my stomach, I have digestive issues when I'm feeling anxious or angry or any of those things, right? So it can show up in that way, or it can show up in headaches. Like our body tells us, it gives us all kinds of signals about how we're feeling, but we have to learn to tune into those so that we can address it.
That is so cool. I mean, it's just the human body, the way that God has designed it to
like
give you warning flags, like, hey, you're not doing well.
something about
you need
this.
to fix this. Yeah, if it's like check engine light in the car comes on, you probably need to do something about it. Most of us don't. We just leave it on and keep driving.
Guilty.
But tire pressure, whatever.
You're judging me right now.
I'm not. But no, I think it's funny. We put so much emphasis and study on. I think a lot of people do put emphasis and study on dieting and body, and they have a lot of knowledge on how to take care of the body, so to speak. But there's not a whole lot of emphasis put on how to take care of the mind.
And that's where the stigma comes from.
And that's where it comes from. It's because the mind will take care of itself, or what?
Or you don't. That's just.
Yeah, we don't talk about it.
We don't talk about that here.
Right.
That's no big deal. Just
is it because,
just power through it.
Yeah, just power through. And is it? What are some of the reasons why somebody would keep that hidden? Like we talk about this mask concept. Like most people, the removal of the mask is a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
So why do people keep those things hidden?
I always want to blame culture, right? But if we just talk about even within the church, right? A lot of times you walk into a church and you see people that are just happy and they seem as though everything's great. This person over here has a great marriage. Look at their kids, right? Like they're behaving so well for this 10 minutes, right, that I see them. But all of those things makes me feel like if I'm going to fit here, then I need to act like they act.
Right.
Right? And so we just increase the pressure. But so much of that is our own internal messaging. So that keeps us from forming relationships with people because we have to pretend, and it keeps us from being honest with people about what we're going through because we feel like we have to live up to what they're living up to in order to fit into that group.
Yeah.
The truth, though, is that everybody's got to struggle.
Right?
Everybody's got to struggle. I got to struggle. You got to struggle, right? Like there's no perfection. Jesus was the only perfection. And even he had emotions, right? So learning how to kind of open up those doors and be a little bit vulnerable is going to help everybody to feel a little bit safer. That's why we're doing this series.
That's why we're doing it. That's right. Okay, so someone's journaling, they're taking tabs on it. One of those other indicators might be the fact that you have these problems and you're trying to hold them. Might be, all right, maybe at the moment you get to that point where you're holding on to this, or you're trying to put on a mask, or those are the things that are affecting everyday life.
Yep.
That's when you know, I need to get help.
Yep.
I need to get help.
If I'm surrounded by people that I feel like I can't tell, what I'm feeling. I don't even know how to express what I'm feeling. That would be a place where a counselor would probably be a good start.
Yeah.
So what we do in counseling is try to give you the language and try to give you the space to be able to kind of unravel whatever's going on with you internally.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't want to give too much information because I do think that there's definitely an art to what you do as a counselor. But what if someone were to say, I'm gonna sign up for counseling? What can they expect? I mean, you talk about giving them the language, and but what are some things that you can expect to encounter? Because let's be real. I mean, there's viewers at home, and there's individuals who counseling is this like taboo thing.
Yeah.
Like that you don't do. It's for the people who are really, really broken and have really, really bad issues. But that's just not true. Yeah. There's a preventative maintenance that can be done through counseling, and so let's clear it. What can they expect? I sign up for counseling. I come in. What happens when I walk in, apart from just being welcomed by incredible people?
Sure. So I want to say there's a range, right? Like there's a range. So what you described is people that are essentially experiencing crisis, right? Okay. So if you're in crisis and you have some really severe diagnosis of some sort, then that's going to look one way, right? Obviously, you're going to get the resources and help and different things that you need. That may include some kind of hospitalization. It just depends, right? Crisis is about keeping someone safe. So if that's what you need to stay safe, then go, right? What we do at Your Story Counseling, because I think that's specifically what you're asking about, is not necessarily crisis counseling. We see a range of different diagnoses, but we also you don't need a diagnosis to go to counseling. We can kind of just meet you where you are, right? So if you walk into my office, you're gonna, I'm just gonna get to know you, right? So I'm just gonna get to know you and the things that you want for your life, the things that you feel like you're not getting out of life, and then we're gonna work on a plan to get there, right? So that might mean getting you more in touch with your emotions. That might mean walking through a relationship that's not healthy. It might mean dealing with some diagnosable disorder where we would partner with a physician and get you some medication and kind of dig you out of that hole. But it really kind of depends on you. It depends on what it is that you're specifically struggling with. Gotcha. And you're 100% right in that we don't ever know what's walking through our door, right? Every single person that walks in is individual, and they don't all fit in. Chris was talking about this morning, not everybody fits in a box, right? We don't fit everybody in a box when you come into counseling either. It's not a set prescription. It is the things that you want for your life, and then giving you the space to explore what that looks like, what can be done differently, possibly challenging you to think about things in a different way, and kind of walking alongside you as you try new things out.
Okay, so at what point they make that call? They're going to get counseling. They're going to call somebody. When does somebody need to do that? I know we talked about checking your trends. It's affecting everyday life, but like there's got to be that like chief indicator.
I think that I'm a little bit biased here. Okay. But I feel like anybody could use counseling. Sure. There's not necessarily like when you get to this place, right? Usually when you're at this place, it's probably too late. Right. Not too late, but it's probably you should have done it before. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Don't wait until it's way too dark before you reach out for help, right? But if you see some red flags along the way, if things aren't going the way that you want them to, right, then that's your clue. Sure. The biggest thing that I think counseling helps with right off the bat is we struggle as humans with being honest. Counseling is a place where you can be. Yeah. Right? It's a first step. It's not the last step, but it's the first step so that you know what that healthy relationship can look like. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so somebody's at home right now and they're going, I need somebody. I need somebody. But it's Sunday. Yeah. And I'm trying, they don't feel like it's an emergency situation, but what are some things that an individual at home right now can do to get them through until they can find the right counselor or what are some personal responsibility things that any individual can do to kind of help get them,
to help them get to where they need to be before they can see a counselor.
Yeah, so I think it's, we talked earlier about finding places to check in with your emotions and those kinds of things. I think it's really just about figuring out what you need, like to take care of yourself. Where are there boundaries that I need to set, right? Like, am I taking too much on? Do I need to say no to some things? Do I need to say yes to some things? Do I need to say no to some people? Do I need to say yes to some people? Like, there's a lot of different places, but I think before you get to a counselor, you can start to think through, if we call it in counseling kind of the miracle question, right? Like, if I walked out of a counseling office or my house or whatever, if I walk out of this room today and everything was perfect, everything was exactly the way that I feel like it should be, what's different? And I think when you can start to answer that question, then you see the places that you can start to make some changes. And counseling can help you to make some of those changes, but some of them you can make on your own, right? Some of them you may not need extra support for. You can just start there.
That's great. That's great. If you're watching, you probably need to hit the backup 10-second mark about 3 more times, and then listen to that again, because that's incredible. I think you're right. You're creating a system of process.
It really helps you to be real about where are the places in life that just really aren't going right for me right now, right? Is it that I need some parenting help? Is it that I need some new friends? Do I need to sit down and have this conversation with my spouse? There's lots of different places. Do I need to look at my career? Do I need to be honest about some finances? All those things, they all play a part.
What about those things we can't control? Things like, because right now, where we're at in our society and our world, COVID-19.
Yeah.
Have you seen an uptick in the amount of depression and anxiety with COVID?
Yeah, I think COVID has given people the opportunity. I mean, if you remember a year ago, right? From a year ago now, it was when everybody was like, I have so much space in my calendar, right? Like, there's so much, like, all my extracurriculars are gone. I can't go and see people, right? Like, so I'm just sitting here, and some people really, really enjoyed that downtime, that, like, summer of nothing. And some people really, really struggled. And some people had kind of a balance, right? And I think that this last year has allowed people to kind of really think through their priorities a little bit, and places where they wanted to make changes, and that could be a really good thing, or that could be a really bad thing. And it also led a lot of people to a place of isolation, where this is not me being quarantined from people and being away from people, as we talked about in the message today, right? That isolation is never healthy.
Never healthy.
And so people that didn't necessarily find ways to reach out to community or find ways that worked for them probably struggled the most through all of that.
For sure. Yeah, so you saw probably a number of issues that you've had come through the office due to COVID-19.
Yeah.
So COVID-19 is one of those things. What about social media? How is social media impacting depression and anxiety?
Well, Sean, social media, I don't want to get on my soapbox at all, but I probably will. Sorry. Social media is a trap for mental health. I mean, it is like it tells you that it's a trap, but then we still fall into it as a trap, right? Like, because the things that we see on social media aren't real. Like, I don't know. I try to be real on social media, but I'm not going to tell you about the argument that I just had with my husband, because you don't want to see that anyway, right? Yeah. So we don't see the good, bad, and the ugly. We mostly just see the good. And so it's a place of comparison. Right. It's a place that can be really dangerous for people, especially people struggling with anxiety and depression, because they see how everyone else is living, supposedly. Yeah, right. And they feel like they can't live up to that, right? And so that is never a healthy place to be. So when we're talking about social media, I think that is often one of the first places that I kind of in counseling we'll tell people to look, right? Like, how much time are you spending there?
Right.
What are you, when you close out of your apps on your phone or on your computer, how do you feel and what are you telling yourself? Because that is an indicator of whether this is a healthy place for you, or even just a healthy time for you to be in this place.
Right.
Right. And so, so boundaries around social media can be hugely helpful. It's hard when, talking about the pandemic, that was a place where sometimes the only place that people felt connected.
Yeah.
And so finding that balance over the last year has been really hard, but it's something that we've got to kind of re-talk about, I think, now that we're in a place where most people are kind of out and about and at least seeing other people's faces.
It's funny you said, I hadn't even thought about it. I hadn't even thought about the way that we programmed our minds over COVID isolation to go to social media as our community outlook and connection. And to now we're coming out of it to some degree, maybe about to go, I don't know, coming out of it to some degree. And now we're having to reprogram because for a year, that was our lifeline, that was our family, that was our communication, that was our validation. And now we got to get back into what is real. Yeah. And that's hard. That's interesting you brought that up. So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that we learn when you're, so clinically, when you go through a trauma, which I would submit that COVID and all of the political stuff that's happened over the last year, like, that is trauma. And so when you go through a trauma, you learn things that work in that moment to survive through it.
Yeah.
You see that with abuse and neglect from childhood, things like that, right? Like, you learn survival techniques and they work for you in that moment. But if we carry them forward throughout life, they don't work forever. Right. They only work in that moment. And the minute that you kind of get out of that space, they become maladaptive patterns, which is a clinical word, right?
That's a good one. Do you look that one up?
Maladaptive patterns.
Spell that for us.
No. But basically it just means that you're trying to do something that is no longer working for you. Yeah. And so I think that everybody at this point, depending on how out in the world you are at this moment, and we don't know what's about to happen, right? Yeah. With numbers and things like that. But I think it's important that we're kind of walking through what has changed for us, our routines and things like that, and seeing if those routines are working for us. Right. Some people, as soon as the world opened back up, dove right back in head first because everything was so bad. And then they just went to the extreme the other way to avoid everything they figured out during, about their relationships or about their whatever. Yeah. And so finding that balance so that we can really be healthy is really just reassessing. Yeah. It's a lot of self-awareness, things like that.
All right, so we've been talking a lot about, all right, if I'm wrestling with it, if you're wrestling with it at home, like, what are the things that you can do? But now I want to talk a little bit from the perspective of a mother, a father, a husband, a wife who has a spouse who is wrestling with this, a child who's wrestling with this, a friend who's wrestling with this. What are some of the things that those individuals can do to help them?
Yeah. It's a big question.
It's a big question. I should have probably asked that further at the top.
That's all right. So I think if you're somebody that is loving somebody who struggles with any mental health issue, right? I think the first thing that you can do is learn about it, right? So get some resources for yourself, get a better understanding. I think one of the things that we talked about this morning was about how depression and anxiety can look different depending on you. So it's different for everybody, and it's not, I think we all have an idea of what depression looks like or what anxiety looks like. And so if your spouse or if your child isn't going through it exactly in that way, it's easier to kind of write it off as something else, because mental illness is scary to us. If we don't know anything about it, it can be scary. And so And so learning more about it, so that can mean talking to a counselor yourself, or there's tons of resources on especially anxiety and depression, and I think we have some resources too, that you can look into just so that you get an understanding, so that you can have a language to use, and also kind of be a safer place for them.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, step 2, right? You want to learn about it, but then you want to figure out, how can I be safe for this person?
Yeah.
Because you don't ever want somebody that you love to not tell you when they're struggling, because that pushes them back into that isolation that we were talking about.
Yeah. Okay, so what happens when you're helping somebody and like it's clear there's a problem, but that person's not willing to accept it themselves? What do you do as that support for them? What do you do from there?
It's hard. You can only help somebody that is ready to be helped. Pushing somebody to counseling when they are adamantly against it for whatever reason is never going to help them. Right. It's frustrating for counselors. It's frustrating for them. It happens all the time, right? Yeah. But at the same time, when somebody's ready, they're going to be willing to do the work, right? Yep. So what you can do in the meantime is just be there and be that safe, open space for them to say the things that are hard. Yeah. You don't have to fix them. You don't have to have all the answers. But sometimes just sitting with somebody, that's 90% of what I do, is just sitting with somebody and hearing how hard it is. Because most people shut down when it comes to those negative or that, I don't want to be a downer, right? And so if you can be somebody that can allow somebody that space, then that goes so long, so far.
That's great. That's good stuff right there, because we all know somebody who's probably wrestling with it. Now, there's dangers to not fixing the problem.
Yes.
If we continue to ignore the check engine light or the tire pressure light, for too long, eventually there will be a problem, and it will have long-term effects or even immediate emergency type effects. What are the dangers of not taking care of the mental health side of depression and anxiety?
I think that the dangers are that they get worse. I mean, I think that's always the danger. It's when you don't address, it's just like physical health, right? Like if I have an issue with my heart and I choose not to go to the doctor over and over and over again, then eventually something is going to happen to my heart, right? Like something that is extreme, right? Yeah. So similar, depression and anxiety, if you don't deal with anxiety, sometimes that can lead to panic attacks. And that is, the extreme of anxiety, right? Not dealing with depression can lead to the extreme of depression, which can be suicidality, and thinking about suicide. And so, so that's where we don't ever want to end up, right? Right.
All right. So we brought it up. Yep. Suicide.
Here we go.
That is a tough topic.
Yeah.
That a lot of people don't want to talk about, but there's definitely, we're seeing it happen. It seems like a lot more and more every day, especially with COVID-19.
Yes.
I got a buddy of mine who's in the military, and he's almost, it seems like weekly, he's dealing with one of their members, taking their own life. And so as far as suicide is concerned, like, what are your thoughts on how someone gets to that place, and then what can be done about it?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say about suicide is that having suicidal thoughts is more common than we think it is. There are people that would never take their lives but still have thoughts about it. Wow. Just that extreme hopelessness. And because we have not created communities where we can talk about that, then when it does get talked about, people panic. Right? And so I think that I just want to say, first of all, right, like, it's more normal than we think it is. I venture to say everybody, but that's not true, right? Like, but most people have at some point in their life some period of hopelessness where they don't see a way out of their circumstances, right? And so those thoughts then cross their mind, and that's normal, right? Like, that is not anything that we should be ashamed to talk about, because people have those thoughts. And the more we keep those masks on and don't talk about that, the less the people that have more severe thoughts are going to find safety.
Yep. All right. So, say someone's listening and they've had these thoughts. What should they do?
So, if you have had those thoughts in the past and it's something that comes up for you from time to time, I would encourage counseling, because you're going to get coping skills. You're going to get a plan to deal with it, right? I'm not going to be able to take away your suicidal thoughts necessarily, but we can engage in whether or not you may need medication to deal with some of that, or we can just give you coping skills for the things that you're dealing with right now, right? Because sometimes we just hit depression, right? And so, yeah, if you're experiencing suicidal thoughts right now, today, there's a hotline, there's a national suicide hotline that will, that you can call, or you can text, and they will walk you through a conversation so that you can just get those emotions out, get those feelings out. If you don't have somebody that you can call in a crisis. If you deal with that on an ongoing basis, you want to be in counseling.
Yeah. So if you're dealing with it on an ongoing basis, you want to be in counseling.
Yes.
Find that. Okay, what about the support person? The support person who is friends, family member, and suicide comes up, and that person says, I've been having suicidal ideations. What should they do?
Yeah, don't panic. Like,
don't
can
panic.
I just say, like I said, it's so scary,
it's
right?
so scary,
like, to think that my loved one is hurting that much. It's scary. But the thing that we hear over and over again from people that deal with suicidal ideation is that they feel like a burden to the people around them. And that's what puts them over the edge, is that they feel burdensome to those around them.
Yeah.
And so if you start to panic and freak out, right, then they're not going to feel safe. Yeah. So it's really, again, being that open, safe space where they can talk about hard things. And once they have talked about it with you, you can work together to figure out what their next steps are. And that may mean calling a crisis line, right? Getting an appointment with a counselor, or going to an emergency room so that you can get that crisis care in that moment.
Yeah.
So you can gauge those things. The National Suicide Line actually is a resource for people that are support also.
Okay.
So if I have a friend that's going through it, I can also call in and say, hey, what do I do?
Yeah.
Right? I'm worried about this person. What are some resources locally? What can I do to be helpful to them during this time? So you can use that if you need it yourself, or if someone that you love. That's good to hear.
So if you know somebody who's dealing with it, then just call a hotline. Call the number that you see. Call the number, and they'll encourage you on what you need to do. But the result could be that they get set up with a counselor, or if it's a serious enough issue, you need to get to an emergency room to get the help immediately that's necessary.
Yeah. Locally, we have mobile crisis lines in each of the three counties. I don't know how you say that.
In the Tri-County area?
In the Tri-County area. We have mobile crisis units that can deploy to where you are. Yeah. So we do have resources locally. And I would really encourage you. I think the thing that happens is that people get scared of that next step, and so they don't take it. But it's scarier to walk through an actual suicide attempt than it is to get the resources that you need in the moment. And sometimes you need those resources, and that's what they're there for.
That's right. Yeah, so if you're listening to this and this is something that you're thinking, I think Pastor Chris said it, don't let your flesh tell you what's best. And that just biblically is the right approach. Like, you never let your flesh tell you what's best, unless your flesh is giving you signs that something's wrong, which then you can listen to your body. But don't let the enemy or the world around you make you think that you don't matter, that there are people who love you and that we want to help you. And so let somebody know, and make sure you reach out if that's what you're feeling. Brooke, thank you so much. Do you have anything else you wanted to add or share?
I don't think so. This is a lot.
This is a lot. Y'all are just going to watch this a couple times. But yeah, no, thank you so much. Your passion to see people find help is evident, and I get to spend time in an office with Brooke a lot, and her heart for seeing people find healing in this is so evident, and she helps people through her team. She has an amazing team at Your Story Counseling, so if that's something you're considering, make sure that you call Your Story Counseling and set up a consultation today and get that ball moving. There are also other resources. There's a book when it comes to depression and anxiety. A book that we're suggesting is Depression, Anxiety, and Other Things We Don't Want to Talk About. That's available in the bookstore, but you can also get that online at some place. But check that book out. I've read the book, and it's a very good book that breaks things down and helps you understand, in layman's terms, what happens in the chemical breakdown of the mind. And so I found it very helpful. So you should check that book out, along with all the other resources that we have, the podcast. And then we also have a Q&A worship night that'll follow at the end of the sermon series. So when we finish up that 4th week, we'll have a worship night along with a panel discussion with some members from Brooke's team and some of the pastors on staff. So you're going to want to make sure you're a part of that. That'll be live here on site. But Brooke, thank you. Thank you, everyone who's tuned in to join in. Hopefully this is a great resource for you, and hopefully it's been helpful. You have to do life, but you don't have to do it alone. All right? So let's walk the extra mile together. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week.